All right, welcome to TalkTensors. Today we're taking a deep dive into a paper all about pigs. Specifically, how we can use machine learning to automatically recognize their behavior in video.
Sounds intriguing. I'm all ears.
Well, the title is a bit of a mouthful. It's called Pig Behavior Dataset and Spatial-Temporal Perception and Enhancement Networks based on the attention mechanism for pig behavior recognition.
Okay, so breaking it down, it sounds like they're trying to teach AI to understand what pigs are doing just by watching them on video.
Exactly. And the implications of that are pretty huge, especially when you think about animal welfare and the future of farming.
I can definitely see that. Being able to automatically detect if a pig is stressed or uncomfortable could be a game changer.
Right. So the paper starts by highlighting the potential benefits for both pig welfare and for making farms more efficient. They talk about how analyzing a pig's posture, like how it's standing or lying down, could help us understand if it's too hot or cold.
Makes sense. And what about those behaviors, like playing with a toy or interacting with other pigs? Can we learn something from that?
Yeah, they mention those too. The idea is that those kinds of interactions can give us clues about the pig's cognitive state, whether it's stimulated, bored, or maybe even anxious.
Fascinating. But from a technical standpoint, what's the core problem they're trying to solve with this research?
Well, the big hurdle they identify is that we really need better data sets and smarter algorithms to make all of this possible. They point out that a lot of the existing video data sets of animal behavior are pretty limited. Some only focus on very specific actions like eating or drinking, and they might not have a lot of variety in the environments they capture.
I see. So it's like trying to teach a child about the world using only pictures from their living room. You need more diversity to really understand things.
Exactly. And then there's the problem of annotation. They need a lot of carefully labeled data to train these machine learning models, and that can be really time-consuming and expensive to create.
Plus, traditional methods of monitoring animal behavior, basically, having humans watch and record everything that just doesn't scale well, especially for large farms.
Absolutely. It's subjective, time-consuming, and can even be disruptive to the animals. So the promise of video-based deep learning where you can analyze tons of footage automatically and objectively, that's really appealing.
I can see why. So before we dive into the specifics of their new approach, do they talk about any of the existing challenges in using computer vision for this kind of work?
Oh, yeah. They touch on some of the basics, like just figuring out where the individual pigs are in each frame of the video. That's called segmentation. And then actually identifying each pig, which is detection.
Which I imagine isn't always easy, right? I mean, pigs can look pretty similar, especially in a crowded pen.
Oh, absolutely. And then you've got changing lighting conditions, pigs partially hidden from view, and of course the classic pig pile. All of that makes things pretty tricky.
So even those foundational tasks have their hurdles. And what about actually recognizing the behavior itself?
Well, they point out that a lot of older algorithms relied on manually designed features, meaning a human had to define what characteristics of the video were important for identifying each behavior, or they might only focus on a handful of very specific behaviors.
Which again limits how well those models can generalize to new situations.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. They drew inspiration from a technique called actor-centric relation networks, or ACRN, which has been used successfully in human action recognition.
Interesting. How does that work?
The key idea is that to understand an action, you often need to look at how the actor, in this case the pig, is interacting with the things around them. So instead of just analyzing the pig's movements in isolation, ACRN considers the relationship between the pig and its environment.
Makes sense. Our actions are often defined by how we interact with the world around us.
Exactly. And this paper takes that concept and applies it to the specific challenges of pig behavior recognition. So they came up with a new type of neural network called a spatial-temporal perception and enhancement network. And the really cool part is they've incorporated something called attention mechanisms.
Attention mechanisms. That sounds pretty advanced.
It is, but the basic idea is that it allows the network to focus on the most important parts of the video for understanding the pig's behavior. Instead of just processing every pixel equally, the network learns to pay more attention to certain areas of the frame or certain moments in time that are most relevant for recognizing a specific action.
So it's like the network is learning to zoom in on the key information just like a human observer would.
Precisely, and they've built this into their network in some really clever ways. Before we get to that, though, let's talk about their new data set, because that's one of the big contributions of this paper.
Right. You mentioned that they needed better data.
Yeah.
So did they build a whole new data set from scratch?
They didn't start completely from zero. They actually built upon an existing data set from a group of researchers led by Bertamini. That original data set had about 1,800 video clips and focused on 5 core pig behaviors. It was filmed in a fairly standard pig farming setup, feeding areas, water drinkers, some enrichment items like toys, and a mix of straw and slatted flooring.
Sounds like a typical pig pen. And how do they film it?
The cameras were mounted above the pens. Now, the original dataset did have annotations, meaning someone had labeled the behavior of the pigs in each frame. But the authors of this paper felt that it was missing some crucial information.
What kind of information?
They wanted to capture more of the nuances of pig behavior, particularly those related to animal welfare. So they set out to expand and improve upon that existing dataset.
That makes sense. To really assess animal welfare, you need to go beyond just basic actions like eating and drinking.
Right. So they ended up with a data set that includes 13 distinct pig behaviors. And they specifically added several new ones that are directly linked to assessing welfare. For example, they included lying down, standing up, nose touching another pig, playing with a toy, and walking.
Interesting. What do those behaviors tell us about a pig's well-being?
Well, for instance, how a sow lies down can impact the safety of her piglets. If she's lying in a way that could crush them, that's a problem. Nose touching is an important social behavior for pigs. It's how they interact and communicate with each other. And a pig that's actively engaging with toys that suggests a positive mental state. It means they're stimulated and not just bored out of their minds.
So they're really looking at a broader range of behaviors to get a more complete picture of the pig's well-being. That's a really important step forward.
It is, and to create this new data set, they had to do a lot of meticulous annotation.
Oh, I bet. Labeling every pig in every frame of video must have been a massive undertaking.
It was. So what they did was they took those longer videos and divided them into shorter clips. Then they used a software tool called VGG Image Annotator to label each pig's behavior approximately once every second.
So pretty granular annotations. What exactly did they label?
For each pig, they drew a bounding box around it in the frame. Then they identified the specific pig because, remember, they need to be able to track individual pigs over time, and they labeled the pig's behavior at that moment in time.
Makes sense. But I imagine there were times when a pig was partially hidden from view. How did they handle that?
That's a great question. They had a specific rule for that. If a pig was obscured by more than 2/3, either because something was blocking it or it was just out of the frame for a significant period of time, they labeled it as hidden.
Which makes sense. If you can't see the pig, you can't really analyze its behavior.
Exactly. And in the end, after all that annotation work, they ended up with nearly 20,000 instances of pig behavior, which is a significant amount of data. And then, like we usually see in machine learning, they split this data into training, validation, and testing sets to properly evaluate their models.
Okay, so we've got the data covered. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of their machine learning approach. You mentioned a spatial-temporal perception and enhancement network. That sounds pretty complex.
It is, but remember, they're dealing with video, which inherently has both spatial and temporal dimensions. They need to be able to analyze both where things are happening in each frame and how those things change over time.
So how does their network architecture tackle that?
Well, they've actually got a dual stream approach, meaning they process the video information at 2 different speeds or frame rates simultaneously.
I see. So one stream might be looking at individual frames in detail, while the other is focusing on the overall flow of movement over time.
Exactly. And then each of these streams is further broken down into 2 main parts, a spatial-temporal perception network and a spatial-temporal feature enhancement network. So let's start with the perception network. What's its job?
Well, if it's about perception, I'm guessing it's responsible for figuring out what's happening in the video, but in a more localized way.
You got it. The spatial-temporal perception network is all about identifying the key regions in the video where the important actions are taking place. And it does this with 2 parallel pathways. One pathway processes the video at a slower frame rate and uses something called a spatial attention residual network with, wait for it, frame-level spatial attention modules, or FLSAM for short.
FLSAM. Okay, so what's that all about?
Think of FLSAM as a way for the network to learn which specific parts of each video frame are most important for recognizing a particular behavior. It's essentially teaching the network to focus its attention on the most relevant spatial cues. So if the behavior is eating, FLSAM might learn that the pig's head and the area around the food trough are the most informative regions to look at.
That's really clever. It's like the network is learning to prioritize where it looks, just like a human would.
Exactly. Now, running alongside that pathway is the other one, which operates at a higher frame rate, and uses an interframe difference residual network with a key motor feature extraction module, or KMFM. This pathway is all about capturing motion.
So while FL-SAM is focusing on where to look, KNFM is trying to understand how things are moving in those key areas.
You got it. KMFM also uses spatial attention to zero in on those relevant regions, but then it goes a step further. It calculates the differences in pixel values between consecutive frames within those regions. This lets it extract features that are specifically related to movement things like the direction and speed of motion in the areas that matter most for a given behavior.
And then these two pathways, the spatial focus from FL-SAM and the motion focus from KMFM, they get combined somehow.
They do. The features from both the low frame rate and high frame rate branches are merged together, and then they apply a technique called region of interest, or ROI pooling. This is a way to extract features that are specifically relevant to each individual pig within its bounding box.
Oh, that's smart. So they're not just looking at the whole frame, but they're zooming in on each pig individually to analyze its specific movements and context.
Precisely. And that brings us to the second main part of the network, the spatial-temporal feature enhancement network.
So if the perception network is about identifying the key features, what does the enhancement network do?
It takes those individual pig features extracted by the perception network and refines them even further. So in the slower frame rate branch, the one with FL-SAM, it uses something called a channel-level spatial attention mechanism, or CL-SAM.
Another attention mechanism. Okay, walk me through this one.
Sure. So CL-SAM looks at all the different feature maps generated by the previous layers of the network and tries to figure out which ones are most informative for the task of behavior classification. It then reweights those feature maps, giving more importance to the ones that contain the most relevant information.
So it's not just about where to look, but also about what to look for within those regions. It's like the network is learning to pay attention to the most telling detail.
Exactly. And over in the higher frame rate branch, the one with KMFM, they use a motion feature enhancement module, or MFM. This module is really interesting because it incorporates an LSTM, which stands for Long Short-Term Memory Network.
LSTMs, I remember those. They're particularly good at understanding sequences of data over time.
Right, and that's exactly what they need here because they're trying to model the temporal relationships within the motion features. So MFM helps the network understand how movements unfold over time, which is crucial for distinguishing between behaviors that might look similar in a single frame. Like, for example, a pig starting to stand up versus lying down.
Gotcha. The sequence of movements is key there. And then, at the end of all this, what happens?
Well, after all that processing, the outputs from both branches of the enhancement network, the spatial focus branch and the temporal focus branch, are combined one last time. And finally, this combined information is fed into a classifier, which is essentially a component that looks at all these features and makes a prediction about the pig's behavior.
So after this whole intricate process, the network spits out a label like eating, walking, or lying down.
Exactly. And now for the big question. Did all of this fancy architecture actually work? Did they manage to improve on existing methods for recognizing pig behavior?
Drumroll, please.
Well, their results were pretty impressive. They compared their model against several well-established video action recognition models, including TSN, TSM, i3D, SlowFast, and of course ACRN, which they drew inspiration from. And on their new 13 behavior dataset, their proposed network achieved a mean average precision, or MAP, of 75.92%.
75.92%. And how does that compare to the other models?
It's a substantial improvement. They beat the best performing voice-line model, which was ACRN, by more than 8 percentage points.
Wow, an 8-point jump is pretty significant in this field, isn't it?
It is. And they noticed particularly strong improvements in recognizing those time-dependent behaviors, like standing up and lying down, which makes sense given the emphasis they put on modeling temporal sequences with the LSTM in their MFM module.
It seems like their efforts to really capture those temporal dynamics paid off. And did they discuss why they think ACRN performed relatively well compared to some of the other baseline models?
They did. They attributed it to ACRN's ability to capture the relationships between the subject, the pig, and its environment. But they emphasized that their approach goes further by explicitly focusing on those key behavioral regions and how they change over time.
So while ACRN might be picking up on some of those interactions implicitly, their model is designed to really zero in on those crucial details.
Exactly. And they highlighted how the FL-SAM helped with those spatially sensitive behaviors, while the MFM really excelled at understanding the temporal progression of those actions that unfold over time.
It's really elegant how they combine those different approaches to create a more comprehensive understanding of the behavior. But it's not enough just to build a better model, right? You also need to understand why it's better. Did they dig into that at all?
Oh, absolutely. They did what are called ablation studies, which is a common technique in machine learning research. Basically, they systematically removed one of their key modules at a time, so FLSAM, KMMM, CLSAM, and MFM, and then they retrained and reevaluated the network.
So by taking out each piece and seeing how performance changes, they could pinpoint the contribution of each module. Clever.
Right, and the results were pretty clear. Each of those modules contributed to the overall accuracy. For instance, when they removed FLSAM, they saw a drop in performance for behaviors that relied heavily on spatial information, like drinking or lying down.
Makes sense. If you're not paying attention to the right spots, you're going to miss crucial cues.
And removing KMFM had a bigger impact on those behaviors that involve a lot of movement, like moving around the pen or walking. So each module really played a specific role.
And taking out CL-SAM and MFM also led to drops in performance, right?
They did. Those modules are important for refining the spatial features and modeling those temporal dependencies.
And didn't they also try combining different sets of these modules to see how they interacted?
They did. They experimented with different combinations, and one interesting observation was that MFM seemed to have a particularly strong impact on its own. They also speculated that maybe a deeper base model architecture might implicitly capture some of those subject-environment relationships that ACRN handles explicitly. But they stressed that their FLSAM module was still crucial for really focusing the network's attention in the right places.
So even if a deeper model could learn some of that context on its own, it's still beneficial to have that explicit guidance from FLSAM. It's like giving the network a head start.
Precisely. And they didn't just stop at numbers. They also provided some visual insights into what their network was actually learning.
Oh, like visualizations. I always find those really helpful for understanding what's going on inside these complex models.
Right. They included visualizations of attention heat maps for a couple of behaviors: eat and lie down. So for eat, the heat maps showed that the network was primarily focusing its attention on the pig's head and the area around the feeding trough, which makes perfect sense.
That's where the action is, literally.
And for lie down, the attention was concentrated on the pig's abdomen and hindquarters.
Which, again, makes sense. Those are the body parts that undergo the most significant change when a pig lies down. It's great that they were able to visualize what the model was actually looking at when making its decisions. It adds a level of interpretability that's often missing in deep learning.
Absolutely. So to zoom out a bit, why is this research so significant? Why should people care about pigs being recognized by AI?
Well, this paper represents a significant leap forward in our ability to understand animal behavior using machine learning. And it has the potential to really transform how we approach animal welfare on farms.
In what ways?
For one, it could lead to much more effective monitoring of livestock. Imagine a system that can automatically detect signs of distress, illness, or even aggression in a group of pigs. That could allow farmers to intervene early and prevent problems before they escalate.
It could also help us improve the living conditions for animals on farms.
Absolutely. If we can understand how different environmental factors influence behavior, we can design better housing systems, provide more appropriate enrichment, and create a more humane environment for these animals.
It's not just about identifying problems, it's about proactively creating a better environment. And from a more practical standpoint, this kind of technology could also help improve farm efficiency.
Right. If you could detect health issues early, that could reduce treatment costs and prevent losses.
So it's a win-win for both the animals and the farmers.
Precisely. This paper is a really compelling example of how cutting-edge AI can be applied to real-world problems with tangible benefits.
It's a great example of how machine learning can be used for good. And now, for our Novel Notions segment, where we like to speculate about future research directions based on what we've learned. So thinking about this paper, what are some interesting avenues for future exploration?
Well, one thought that jumps out at me is the potential to move beyond just video data. This study focused solely on visual information, but imagine if we could incorporate other sensory data as well.
Like what kind of data?
Well, for starters, we could include audio data. The sounds pigs make, their grunts, squeals, and other vocalizations can tell us a lot about their emotional state. Are they distressed, content, playful? We could also incorporate data from environmental sensors like temperature and humidity readings, which could have a big impact on behavior.
And if we really want to get fancy, we could even think about incorporating physiological data from wearable sensors.
Exactly. Like heart rate, respiration rate, maybe even body temperature. Of course, getting pigs to wear sensors might be a challenge, but it's a thought.
A pig Fitbit. Maybe one day. But the point is, by combining all of this different information, video, audio, environmental, and physiological, we could get a much richer, more holistic understanding of pig behavior.
Right. We might be able to detect subtle cues related to health or well-being that are simply not visible in video alone.
That's fascinating. A truly multi-sensory understanding of our farm animals. Any other research directions that come to mind?
Another important area to focus on is improving how well these models can generalize to different real-world farming scenarios.
Because not all farms are created equal.
Exactly. This study used a specific data set collected under controlled conditions. But farms can vary widely in terms of lighting, the layout of the pens, the breeds of pigs they raise, and even the way those pigs are managed.
So a model that works perfectly in one farm might not work as well in another.
Right, so future research could focus on techniques like transfer learning and domain adaptation. These techniques allow us to take a model trained on one data set and adapt it to work effectively on new, unseen data from different environments.
So instead of having to collect and annotate tons of new data for every farm, you could fine-tune a pre-trained model using a much smaller amount of data specific to that farm.
Exactly. That would make this technology much more practical and affordable to implement in real-world settings. And techniques like domain adversarial training or meta-learning could be very valuable in achieving that kind of generalizability.
These are some really compelling directions for future research. And it's exciting to think about the potential impact this kind of technology could have on the future of farming.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the power of machine learning to address real-world challenges and create a more sustainable and humane future for both animals and humans.
Great. So to wrap up, this paper introduces a new comprehensive data set focused on pig welfare and a really innovative neural network architecture that does an impressive job of recognizing pig behavior from video.
It's a great example of how cutting-edge AI research can be applied to solve important problems in agriculture.
And it definitely gives us a lot to think about in terms of the future of animal welfare and the role of technology on farms.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Thanks for tuning in to TalkTensors. We encourage you to check out the full paper if you're interested in learning more. The link is in the show notes. And as always, keep those tensors talking.
Until next time.